Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 249. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. On today's show, Dave DeCamp, news editor of antiwar.com, returns to the show, and we talk about the war going on in Ukraine, several different key issues. Dave's really covered the weapons lab, so I'm going to ask him about that, the CIA paramilitaries, and the talks going on. So a lot of important stuff about the war on today's show. You're definitely going to want to share the show. You can find it at the Libertarian Institute and also where me and Dave both work at antiwar.com. You can find the show on YouTube, Rumble, and Odysee. We have a Facebook and a Twitter account. The Twitter handle is @con_interest. I'm at Kyle Anzalone _ on Twitter, and you can also support the show by donating at Patreon, Subscribestar, or by donating crypto, and all that information is in the show notes page. The last way to help the show is by doing your CBD shopping at Paloma Verde, PalomaVerdeCBD.com, promo code PEACE. That saves you 20% when you spend $75 or more, and it gets the show a kickback. They have a great selection of high quality CBD products at Paloma Verde. Everything I've tried has worked very well. They have the lab tested results right there on their website. The topicals, the sports cream is my personal favorite, but they have gummies, soft gels, extracts, even products for your dog. So whatever you got going on, there's probably something that could improve your life at Paloma Verde, PalomaVerdeCBD.com, promo code PEACE. All right, here's an interview with Dave DeCamp. Hey, Dave. Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. How you doing today?
Good, Kyle. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, happy to have you back on, and I'm sure you, like myself, have been very busy the past 3 weeks. I feel like it's probably been about a month since I had you on the show, maybe a little bit more, and that time has just been extremely busy, and there's so much going on, and there's a couple stories that I feel like I haven't paid as much attention to on the show just because there's so much else with this Ukraine thing, but I know that you've been writing a lot about it, so I want to get your take on it. And the one thing that the most people are asking me about right now is one thing that I really haven't covered, and that is these labs that the U.S. was apparently funding. Now, that seems confirmed, right? I guess, start us off with, what do you feel is like absolutely 100% no doubt factually true, and then like what are the Russian claims? I think China has made some claims here too, so then what's like the possibilities of what's happening here?
Yeah, so first thing is that there are, Pentagon funded labs in Ukraine. Now, the extent of which the Pentagon is involved with them is kind of, I'm not really sure about that, but there's, there's about 26. So I'll just tell you the source on this quick. So the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, they had an article. This is kind of the most definitive
Those are the people
proof.
that do like 5 minutes to midnight, 3 minutes to midnight, right?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
all right.
So they had an article on February 25th, which was the day after Russia invaded Ukraine, and they quoted Robert Pope. And he's the director of the Pentagon's Cooperative Threat Reduction Program, which is part of the Pentagon's Defense Threat Reduction Agency, the DTRA. And that's what funds these labs in Ukraine and in other post-Soviet states. And according to that article, the U.S. has been involved with 26 of these facilities in Ukraine, including 6 that they've helped with material support. According to a fact sheet recently released by the Pentagon, they've put in $200 million into these labs since, since 2005. So 200 million.
So
And that's
yeah,
just
200
what we
minutes,
know.
that's a
I
lot of
know
money.
from this. Yeah, that's just what I know from this Pentagon fact sheet that Tulsi Gabbard actually shared after she got a bunch of crap for saying that there should be a ceasefire to secure the labs and make sure nothing is released. So anyway, so February 25th, Robert Pope, a U.S. Works for the Pentagon in this program. He was telling the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists that he was worried that the fighting in Ukraine could cause the release of a dangerous pathogen that could be in these U.S. linked labs. he said he didn't think Russia would attack the labs because they know what's in there or they have an idea. But he said, it's a war. There could be an accident. And he said that there, in some of these labs, there could be pathogens left over from the Soviet Union's bioweapons programs. So right there, now, we don't know if these labs are creating bioweapons. Most of them are only biosafety level 2, which is a lower level. There is one BS3 lab in Odessa, and there might be more. I'm not really sure. There's other people that are way more versed on this stuff that have been writing about it and researching it well before this invasion. So this didn't just come out of nowhere. And Russia has been talking about these programs for years. So we have the official on record saying that there could be Soviet bioweapons in these labs, and Russia said that they have documents. I think they presented these documents that show that Ukraine's health ministry ordered the destruction of dangerous pathogens at these labs around the time they invaded, including anthrax, plague, and other dangerous pathogens. The World Health Organization said last week, they were asked by Reuters about the labs. They said that they advised Ukraine's health ministry to destroy some, I forget how they described it, high-risk pathogens, I think, that were in the labs. So, there's evidence. It's not under dispute if there are U.S.-linked and funded labs in Ukraine. It's not really disputed that there could be bioweapons in them, or dangerous enough pathogens that if there's a release, it could be a big problem.
And so just one thing, because I think this is maybe important, is one way I heard this portrayed is this was like leftover from the Soviet Union. And, as the Ukrainian government is corrupt and has all these funding issues and everything like that, the U.S. comes in and helps, make sure these labs are operating and at like a okay capacity. That way we don't have any accidental leaks or anything like that, Dave. And because there's leftover things, like in the 1990s, there were like chemical weapons that were in Iraq that were too dangerous to move, but yet, Saddam Hussein didn't have control over them. So maybe it's a situation like that, and the U.S. is just buying Ukraine freezers and things like that to basically keep these things in the safest condition possible. But if you're saying that they're rushing to destroy all of them, then it seems like that would have been an option all along. And so the U.S. was trying to gain something with or maybe not, somebody was doing something active with these labs. They just weren't like a little they were there for a long time, so we kept them there, but they were just kind of storage.
Yeah. I mean, one of the big reasons why, that's what the U.S. says, is that the whole point of this program is to, reduce the threat of these leftover WMDs. But if they're rushing to destroy stuff, then why were they holding on to these things? And, one thing that's just kind of really suspicious is how much they tried to downplay it, and how, when the White House and the Pentagon were asked if there's any truth to it, they just said it's complete. It's just completely false. Because that was really the Russian accusation. Now, there's been all sorts of accusations from Russia about them making bioweapons, but kind of the official one, from what I understand, that they're putting out there is, that there's these labs with bioweapons and they were rushing to destroy them, and they want to know more about it. And, there's been other accusations, but I don't know what level of the Russian government these were made, that they were creating bioweapons to target, Slavic DNA and things like that. So they're definitely overstating it and kind of hammering it to make the U.S. look bad. But the way the U.S. reacted, I think, really says a lot. And the way the media went along and did all these fact checks. Some said that there was no, I think it was USA Today. It was claim there are U.S. funded biolabs in Ukraine. False was there, what they decided.
But we do have an admission from Victoria Nuland now, right?
Yeah. So that was kind of what set off this media storm, kind of from from the beginning. Victoria Nuland at a Senate hearing was asked by Marco Rubio, are there bioweapons or chemical weapons in Ukraine? And she said, there's biological research facilities and we're working with the Ukrainians to secure them. And there's certain materials that we don't want Russia to get. And she looked like pretty concerned about it. And so that's when, we picked up on it because I vaguely knew things about these bioweapons, about this stuff. And that kind of sparked all the new attention. That's when we kind of started looking at it because I saw the whole time Russia saying it. And I knew there were some labs I didn't know the connection. But then you have Victoria Nuland, I mean, out of all people, saying, admitting that there is something in these labs that we don't want Russia to get. That's kind of that was a big admission. So yeah, it's definitely something worth. There's a lot of truth to it, and of course on the internet you're going to get all sorts of claims about it. But what people should understand is that there's U.S. linked labs that could have bioweapons. That's not in dispute.
Yeah. And I just wanted to ask, and this is kind of speculation on my part, but when I hear Soviet era chemical weapons, the big one from the past 5 years has been Novichok, and one of the key claims against Russia in the chemical weapons are the alleged poisoning of the Skripals in Salisbury, UK, and then against Alexei Navalny on a flight or in his underwear or whatever, is that this Novichok agent is unique to Russia. And so if these are being produced in these Ukrainian or tampered with in these Ukrainian labs, then that would certainly at least a little bit undercut that argument. Not that there's any links at all otherwise between either of those two things, except, just the U.S. doesn't have a whole lot of evidence that Russia's behind it anyway. So I was wondering if you heard anything about that particular chemical weapon.
No, I haven't seen anything. All the stuff that I've seen were about specifically like biological things like anthrax and
Okay.
the plague and that stuff.
All right. Is there anything else about this, or I guess? Oh, and then the next question I have too is investigation. So China has, I think, backed an investigation at the UN, but who would actually oversee this investigation? Would it be the OPCW? And if it is, I guess I have like zero faith that any accurate report will ever come out after what's happened in Syria. So I'm just wondering if you have any like idea of what route an investigation would take, where like an actual truthful answer will come out here that's not US or Russian propaganda.
Yeah, I mean the chances of that seem pretty low because I assume it would be the OPCW. I don't really know for sure, but with all the power and influence the U.S. has over the UN and that organization, I think it would be pretty tough to get a real neutral, non-political investigation of these labs, especially how the U.S. is kind of reacting to it and just saying it's total nonsense and the labs are totally innocent. So I wouldn't really expect us to really find out anytime soon. At least in the future we might learn more. But I wouldn't assume that we're going to really know what's in those labs. Anytime in the near future.
Yeah, somebody needs to dump something to WikiLeaks or something like that is one of the hopes. Okay, so anything else on the chemical weapons labs that you want to mention? Anything's important? Anything like that?
I'll just say, I mean, again, the reaction to the way the U.S. government, people in Congress, and the media are reacting to it is the thing that raises a lot of red flags to me. Like you had Tulsi Gabbard put out a video, said there should be a ceasefire so we could secure the pathogens, and Mitt Romney and Adam Kinzinger called her like a traitor, a treasonous liar. Like I said, I think that just says a lot about the situation and the atmosphere that we're in now.
I agree. Now, Dave, I don't know if you've wrote about, but it's a similar kind of topic. And in fact, when it initially was brought up by Russia, I was somewhat dismissive of it because I thought Russia was almost trying to just use like an Iraq war justification for this as a way to mock the U.S. or something. But Russia was talking about the Ukrainians potentially making nuclear weapons or something like that. And so I feel like there's been less that has come out about this, but have you seen anything? Do you think there's any real concerns there? Russia did seem interested in securing the, Ukrainian nuclear sites, and I believe prior to the Russian invasion, Zelensky did say something along the lines of, Ukraine doesn't have to remain committed to non-nuclear status.
Yeah, I haven't seen any evidence that they were working on nuclear weapons or anything like that. But I know Zelensky did say that like the day before or right before Putin, ordered the invasion, and he said something like maybe we should get nuclear weapons, and Putin made a big deal about it. It seemed like it really pissed him off. So yeah, I don't know if there's really anything to that, but you wonder why Zelensky would say that at that time.
Well, you can only imagine, Dave, what would happen in the U.S. if the Ayatollah just mused, maybe we should build a nuclear bomb. I think, that would probably elicit maybe a similar invasion to what Putin did. Let's talk about the CIA paramilitaries, because I think this is maybe one of the keys to the whole invasion here. Although that's speculation on my part, but in several ways, not just that what the paramilitaries were doing on the ground in Ukraine until pretty recently, but also who they were training and what the U.S. thinks the benefits of training insurgency force in Ukraine is. So, what are the latest developments on the paramilitaries in Ukraine?
Yeah, so this was Yahoo News reported this earlier this week that citing all former officials and former intelligence officials, and they said that right after the war in the Donbass broke out, after the Yanukovych was ousted, and the separatists declared independence, the CIA sent paramilitary. That's how they described them, paramilitaries, to the front lines of the war to train the Ukrainians. Now, it sounded like they were very careful about it, and in the beginning, they said it was only numbered in the single digits, the number of people that they sent there, and it said they trained them, sniper techniques, how to avoid kind of being tracked by Russia's, intelligence capabilities that they had there, and also how to use, U.S. provided Javelin anti-tank missiles that the U.S. started giving Ukraine under Trump. And this lasted, about 8 years when the war started in 2014, and until last February. According to this report, the Biden administration pulled them out. So it's pretty revealing of what of how involved the U.S. was in this war. Besides, the overt support and the weapons and the training missions that they did in Western Ukraine at a base that Russia just recently bombed. Actually, there are National Guard troops there, also Special Operations Forces, where it's not really clear where they've been. But Yahoo News reported earlier, I think this came out in January, that there was a U.S.-based CIA training program for Ukrainian forces that was held at a base in the South somewhere in the United States, that started in 2015. And, the former CIA official that Yahoo News quoted said that they were training an insurgency, and that they were training that they learned how to kill Russians at this school in America. So yeah, it's just another layer to possible reasons why U.S. involvement in the war and support for Ukraine could have played into the motivation for Russia to launch this latest assault.
Yeah. So I guess on this, do you have any idea, of who the U.S. was training, if at all there was any Azov involvement in that?
No, not. There's no. They didn't specify exactly who they were training, but it's possible. I'm sure there's a good chance that some Azov or other.
My guess is that there's now a whole lot of vetting going on, and the same thing like with all these white nationalists and neo-Nazis from around the world traveling to Ukraine. My guess is that the U.S. government isn't doing a whole lot to track who those people are, paying much attention to it, and potentially creating a problem there. Let's talk about TOTS, Dave, and there's some interesting stuff going on with that. But overall, what has your assessment been of the Biden administration's effort to engage the Ukrainians in TOTS?
In talks with Russia, I don't think the Biden administration has really made any effort to be involved or to tell Ukraine to kind of pursue a diplomatic path. I mean, there's no evidence to suggest that. The latest line now, when Jen Psaki or Ned Price are asked about the U.S. involvement in the negotiations, if they're pushing for a diplomatic solution, they say, well, we're doing it in two ways. We're sanctioning Russia to hurt their economy, and we're giving Ukraine military and humanitarian support so they have better leverage in the negotiation. So basically, we're trying to destroy Russia's economy and give Ukraine more weapons. So if that's your answer about your involvement in diplomacy, that tells me that they're not involved at all. And that, again, Russia's been very clear about most of their demands, and one of the biggest ones is neutrality, is that they would declare neutrality from NATO and the U.S. So this type of support, it doesn't seem like it's helping reach that goal. And so the talks have been ongoing. I mean, they seem like they're pretty intense. That it seems like both sides are interested in talking, including Ukraine. They've been doing it virtually for a few days. There was a report it's tough to really know what's going on. They're not sharing many details. There was a report in the Financial Times that said they drew up a peace plan, and it involved Ukraine declaring neutrality, but they want security guarantees, and they say they want security guarantees from the West, like the U.S. and the U.K., as well as Russia. So who knows how that could work out? I don't really know.
Well, yeah, and it seemed like that would, require the U.S. signing a defense pact or a defense guarantee for Ukraine, which would have to pass the U.S. Senate. Like, it would be a treaty obligation to go to war with Ukraine. And so, I thought there was a lot of interesting parts of that. The first being that this seems just like an end run for the Ukrainians to be able to get like Article 5, because look, the security guarantee from Russia and China obviously mean nothing. So they're really focused on the U.S., UK, France, Germany, and Turkey. But if Russia is agreeable to that at all, it does really suggest that the top Russian concern is the placement of weapons and the trainings and the troops in Ukraine over the, kind of Article 5 part of that guarantee. Because that, would be what Russia is getting out of that side of the deal. But I will almost be surprised if Russia would go for something like that. But, interesting, reporting that we're getting there.
Yeah, but from what I understand, it said that Financial Times report said that the nature of the guarantees was still like a pretty big sticking point, because I would doubt that Russia would agree to something like a Article 5 type mutual defense thing, and I would doubt that the U.S. would agree to that too. So that could be another thing the U.S. might be dangling in front of Ukraine to get them to keep fighting. I just don't know. And then the other big things is Crimea and Donbass. That's Russia's other demand, is that they want Ukraine to recognize Crimea as Russia and the Donbass as independent. So the details on that, I mean, I don't know, but I think it shows the negotiations and Russia's demand. They show that they're still going all out. They're not going all out right now in their military offensive to like take over Ukraine. That they have these pretty specific demands, and if you look at where the assault is focused, it's all in the east there. So, if these negotiations fail, I think the war can get a lot more ugly.
Yeah. Well, those are the two conditions by Russia that, you kind of have to understand, and in a way could bring an end to conflict in Ukraine, particularly the Donbass. If the Ukrainian government doesn't recognize the independence of the Donbass, it seems unlikely that the Ukrainian civil war is going to end, even if Russia would withdraw its troops. And so it's not bringing an end to war in Ukraine. And so it seems like a pretty probably must offer. Now, maybe I'm wrong, but from my understanding, the armies of the Donetsk and Luhansk are still fighting alongside Russia. And so my guess is that the Russian invasion hasn't upset those people so much that they've flipped sides and now, want to rejoin Ukraine or anything like that. And, long term, they still want their own independence from the Ukrainian government. And if that's the case, if Ukraine's unwilling to recognize it, it doesn't seem like this war ends anytime soon. Yeah, so I guess those. Now, as you point out, the U.S. is kind of like dangling things in front of Ukraine. We had the MiG-29s, but now we have S-300s. And, this is pretty interesting, right? Because I guess if you are sitting there, if you're like, if Zelensky's in his bunker in Kiev and he's, hunkered down and having these phone calls with Russia, if he could set up like, a working air defense system and reestablish air defenses, and then, could deploy something against the Russian like columns, then that could be a real advantage for his side. But it seems unlikely to happen. But if he thinks it might, why would he surrender? And so I don't know. What do you think about this proposal, but also what these ideas, what impact they could have on like the actual war negotiations?
Yeah, well, Zelensky, Biden the other day, he just announced a new $800 million weapons package for Ukraine. And earlier it was $200 million. He gave him $1 billion in weapons in like a week. And the S-300 thing now, it seems like that might have some legs. Slovakia is saying that they'll give them their S-300s if they can get like a proper replacement from the U.S. or other NATO countries. I read this morning, I forget which country it was, but they're saying they'll give them some Patriot missiles.
Germany.
It was Germany, yeah.
Jeez.
And I think this stuff will prolong the war. I don't really see how it couldn't. But with Zelensky, what he keeps asking for, I mean, it's pretty scary. If you watched his address to Congress, he's asking the U.S. to go to war with Russia, by asking for this no-fly zone. Now, Biden has been he seems pretty firm that, the U.S. isn't going to do the no-fly zone, which would involve shooting down Russian planes and bombing Russia, bombing their surface-to-air missiles that they can take out planes anywhere in Ukraine. And they showed that with that airstrike recently in Western Ukraine on the base. I forget the name of it, where they were training where they had foreign fighters, where the U.S. and NATO troops have trained Ukrainian soldiers in the past. It's like 15 miles from the border of Poland. So I think that was a big message from Russia. Like you can't close the sky, as Zelensky puts it, when Russia has the capability to take any plane out of the air from their own territory. There can be no limited no-fly zone or humanitarian no-fly zone. So what they're calling for now, but you're seeing more support in this, and that Lithuania's parliament yesterday passed a resolution calling for the no-fly zone. They joined Estonia. Slovenia's prime minister has said publicly that he's in favor of it. More and more ultra hawks in Congress are warming up to the idea. So this is a little different than what you asked about, like the weapons that they are providing and how much it could affect the war. But I think, that might also be factoring into what Zelensky's doing. If he sees that there is growing support, maybe NATO will just go to war with Russia, which I don't understand how he could want that to happen in his country. To be a battlefield between the U.S. and Russia, like it just doesn't make much sense to me. You think all the destruction that could cause. So yeah, all of this stuff just plays into him prolonging the war. And just back to the peace talks thing, Israel's Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, he's been kind of a mediator between Putin and Zelensky, and reports from Israeli media and Israeli officials have said that the offer that Putin gave Zelensky is tough, they say, for Ukraine to accept, but it keeps Ukraine's sovereignty. Um, Ukraine is able to, it's not like they have to give everything up. It's really Donbass, Crimea, shrink their military and neutrality. It seems like that's the demands. But as things go on, I think that what Russia wants is they're going to ask for more.
That makes sense that they have more leverage, of course.
Hmm.
I did read that apparently Ukraine wasn't very happy with the way the Israelis portrayed that, and the Ukrainian foreign minister rejected a call from the Israeli foreign minister, Yair Lapid. So it's
Hmm.
I don't know. It's interesting the position that you would think Ukraine would be in, which is, like beggars can't be choosers, right? Like they basically need help from anybody where they could get it. And so if the Israelis are helping to negotiate, you think they would just be happy with the Israelis. But, you see the same thing with Zelensky's rhetoric. He's like called people cowards and stuff for not coming to the aid of his country. And, I feel, I guess, maybe a little bit of sympathy for him because, for what the past year, the Biden administration has been saying, we're committed to defending the Ukrainians' territorial sovereignty. And we
Hmm.
all knew that was a lie. But I was kind of concerned that Zelensky might not realize that. And if he really believed it, he may feel like, he kind of got screwed on this. One of the things that I think Zelensky must believe is that a no-fly zone over Ukraine would somehow be established like in Syria, where the U.S. does keep the Russian planes off of most of the time, I think, the territory west of the Euphrates River. And so maybe Zelensky thinks if NATO establishes a no-fly zone, Russia won't test it. Not that I think that that's very smart, but if he's pushing for it, he has to think that there's some way this doesn't turn into a wider conflict in his country, right? Like, I don't know. He just has to imagine it working. You know what? So the S-300, kind of like the MiG-29s, right? Where you could maybe you smuggle them into the country somehow, right? There's enough aid coming in. Like you break these things down. Like maybe you could put it into the back. I don't know exactly if you put it into the back of a semi truck, but maybe you could smuggle it into the country, in the middle of the night or something like that. But how many times could you actually use the system, right? Like once you fire once, Russia's got to hit it with their cruise missiles. So what could be the potential benefit of this? And then, of course, the other problem is this proliferates the Patriot missiles into Europe, and that's even a bigger issue for Russia. I mean, this seems like just a huge quagmire, and I can't believe the U.S. is even going along with it. And then, did you have a take on what the U.S. thoughts on this were? Because if this was just something floated by the Slovakian defense minister, okay, but he did say it with Lloyd Austin there at a press conference, and Austin didn't say, haha, no, that's stupid. So I don't know. What do you make of this?
Yeah, I mean, well, it seems like Austin said, "Oh yeah, we're talking about it, but there's no announcements to be made." But now you see, if Germany's willing to give them Patriots, then it seems like it might happen, and that's what's kind of really scary now is that they're not backing down at all, the U.S. and NATO. I mean, they're making plans for really long-term permanent presence now in the Baltics and Eastern Europe there. I mean, they haven't announced like specific plans, but that's all they're talking about right now. And the U.S. has sent that so many thousands of troops. Right now, there's about 100,000 U.S. troops in Europe for the first time since 2005, I think. And back then, they were kind of supporting the wars in the Middle East there. But this is about Russia now. There's 10,000 troops in Poland, U.S. troops. I mean, it's going to turn into, because when we were, leading up to the invasion, back when I thought, this wasn't going to happen, the U.S. was sending like a few thousand troops to Poland, Romania, and the Baltics, kind of spread out. But now, like, if you look at everything added up, it's becoming pretty significant. I still think in the Baltics it's only 2,500 troops spread throughout, but I think we could see in the future those numbers going up and other more advanced weapons. They're saying there were some reports, I think it was Stars and Stripes, but they're saying if the U.S. wants to send more tanks to Europe, they're not going to send them to Germany because they're all filled up. They're going to send them east. They're going to, U.S. tanks could end up on Ukraine and Russia's borders. That's a pretty scary thought. So, judging by how the U.S. is doing this and just ramping up the sanctions, I don't think they have any intention of trying to de-escalate this. I think it's all about just completely isolating Russia, trying to destroy their economy, and funding a long, long insurgency in Ukraine. I think that's what they want. Blinken said that he expects Russia to suffer a strategic defeat in Ukraine. I mean, the only way for that to happen is if this is drawn out for years and possibly decades with more the Ukrainians just getting more and more weapons, and it's just, I think they have some pretty really terrible plans for this situation.
Yeah. Oh, so there's a lot there. And I want to ask you this question. I addressed it on the show. I asked Scott about it on the show, but the last time I had you on, you did say you didn't think the invasion was going to happen. I was pretty sure that they were not going to invade, at least not right now. Now, at the same time that, in on April or mid-February, I was wrong about Russia invading, and but long term, we were talking about that this was a consequence of NATO expansion and everything like that. But do you have any sense on, I guess, do you think that the U.S. was right that, Putin was really planning this from, the beginning of November? Do you think something happened more recently, or do you have any indication or any thoughts on why Russia decided now is the time to invade?
Well, I know there was a report in The Intercept from what's his name. He was a really bad Russiagator, so we didn't really do anything with it. Was it Ryzen?
Yeah.
And that said that U.S. intelligence was surprised. They said it was a surprise when he actually did it at the end of February. So leading up to it, I think Russia gave them some real off ramps with the security proposals. So one of the reasons I didn't think anything was going to major like this was going to happen was because I thought if the U.S. really thought Russia was going to invade, that they would have, given them some concessions. And I thought that what they did, the arms control stuff, might have been enough. But they never addressed seriously the concern about Ukraine joining NATO, even though, making that agreement, it would be, it's nothing to the U.S. Biden said a few times during all this in December, January, things were building up. He said, Ukraine's not joining NATO anytime soon. So why can't you just put that in writing that they're not going to join? So I think, that Putin was waiting to see what the U.S. and NATO would do, and he saw them building up more in the east there, and he saw that they didn't take their security proposal seriously, and then that's what would happen here. And the war in the Donbass showed, it was escalating. There was more shellings. It's tough to say which side, kind of sparked that escalation. And that, I think, had a lot to do with it too. I mean, that war has been going on for 8 years, and Ukraine didn't try to end it through the Minsk agreements, and the U.S. wasn't putting any pressure on them to do it. So I think all those factors added up, and he decided to do it.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, maybe according to some U.S. senators, this would be a treasonous statement to make now, Dave, but it seems like in December, the U.S. could have declared neutrality for NATO or for Ukraine, and then really pressured Zelensky to enforce the Minsk agreement, which Russia and Germany support, right? Like, this isn't like some pro-Russian agreement or anything absurd. This is, the Donbass remains a part of Ukraine with more autonomy. And the U.S. empowered Zelensky to do the opposite and to say that no, we're not going to play by the rules of the Minsk agreement. I mean, he was openly, saying he wouldn't abide by it. And if that's the case, then I mean, I don't know. They're just, again, as you say, there are so many off ramps. It's almost unbelievable that none of them were taken. I want to
Yeah,
get back.
and that's
Good.
again, I was being naive, I think, because I thought maybe there was some because the U.S. and Russia were talking a lot. I mean, at all levels,
Mm-hmm.
and leading up to it. So I thought there were some backdoor negotiations going on. I thought that they would, concede enough to stop it, but they didn't. And it seems like maybe this is what they wanted. And you look at the administration. I remember, I think the last time I was on, I was saying, they're not going to invade. Nothing's going to happen. And you said, well, look at, you have Newland and Jake Sullivan and Blinken and Joe Biden, all these people that really don't like Russia and Putin, and who were humiliated in 2014 when they backed the coup and he took Crimea. And they probably wanted to drag Russia in and support an insurgency. And you were right about that.
I mean,
And
I guess I wasn't bold enough to actually believe, though, that the U.S. policymakers could be that dark. Because,
yeah,
right, like, if the U.S. in December had, again, told Zelensky, like, seriously, you get this Minsk deal done, and listen, we'll help you out with the neo-Nazi problem. Like, if those guys come for you, we'll make sure, like, you have some legit guards or something like that. Like, don't worry about it, right? And then said that, yep, NATO is not going to accept Ukraine, and no Ukrainians die, right? Like, no Ukrainian cities destroyed, no airstrikes, none of this is happening. And so it seemed unbelievable to me that given those two options, anybody would willingly choose the second. But I think from the position of the Biden administration, they must have sat there and said, well, if Russia doesn't just cave to our whims, then, we have this really nice plan B all ready to go. So, and I, my guess is their thinking was a little bit more like that than, we want, like, Brzezinski, who openly says, like, he wants to bait Russia into a war to fight street by street in Kiev. Like, there are some sick people like that. I don't know if Newland and Sullivan and probably not Biden go that far, but, my guess is that they were very happy with that plan B sitting around. And yeah, I mean, I guess it is like the U.S. government to do something like that, isn't it?
yeah, absolutely. And I think, hopefully we get some leaks out of this administration. WikiLeaks style releases would be great, because I bet we would learn that they were,
Well,
um,
if they could in any way spin this as a victory or for them a loss for Russia, we'll probably get it straight from the New York Times, Dave. They'll be saying, "Yeah, we baited Putin on that one, and it worked out so poorly for this dumbass." To
yeah,
get back to the current news, though, there was this plan by Poland that was pretty concerning. And it was for a peace mission in Ukraine, and so this would be like a little buffer zone or something along the border. But boy, that sounds like deploying NATO forces into Ukraine.
hmm yeah, it does. So this was first floated by Poland's deputy prime minister, and then the thing I wrote up about it. So the idea, he said, a peace mission into Ukraine that can defend itself. So, armed NATO troops in Ukraine, which to Russia would be them entering the war. And I assume if they did that, Russia would bomb them as soon as they entered Ukraine, as soon as they got a line on them. But the thing I wrote up is other NATO allies, was the Dutch defense minister, the British defense minister, they seemed a little hesitant to really give it any thought. Although today I saw Poland's, I forget if it was the president. I think it was the president. This is just something I saw earlier. I haven't even really read it yet. But he said that he's gonna, Poland to propose Ukraine peacekeeping mission at NATO summit, the prime minister. So that's kind of alarming that they're not just dropping this idea that Russia would view as NATO entering the war. So I think that's something we got to watch out for. But I don't know. I question my instincts on this stuff again now because, like I said, I didn't think that they wouldn't try to stop the war if they could. But like I think, how can they send troops into Ukraine? Like, what are you risking there? You're risking like the end of humanity. A hot war between NATO and Russia. I mean, how quickly could that turn nuclear? But again, it seems like they just don't want to stop this. And I'm surprised to see that countries like Poland are putting out ideas like this when they're right there. You know, they're in the firing line way more than the United States is. So yeah, hopefully it doesn't get any traction.
Yeah. Um, so I haven't seen really anything mentioned like this in the U.S. except for Scott Ritter said something like, "I might not be." It seemed to say it might not be that bad of an idea, but let's talk about this bill that just got passed in the House because it's getting a lot of attention today, and it is to suspend all trade or just suspend normal trade relations with Russia and Belarus, and yeah, what's going on with this, Dave?
Yeah, so this was a plan Biden announced last week. He said that he would suspend trade relations. What that means is, most countries, with the exception of, I think it's just North Korea, uh, and I forget what the other country is, but the U.S. has like a most favored trade. They have a most favored trade status with the U.S., which means basically it's open trade without tariffs or other restrictions. So that this bill would strip Russia and Belarus of that, paving the way for tariffs and things like that. So yeah, this is probably the Senate has its own version. So this is probably going to go through pretty quick, and Biden will sign it because he announced the plan. Um, and he also announced that they would, they banned, he signed an executive order banning Russian oil imports and other energy, gas and stuff. And he said that he's also going to ban the import of other Russian goods like vodka, seafood, and diamonds. So it's just more restrictions that aren't going to do anything to end the fighting in Ukraine. It's just going to kind of make prices higher here, and it's just going to hurt, Russian businessmen that export this stuff. So yeah, and only eight people in the House voted against it, all Republicans, which is interesting. So all this stuff has support. The oil. So Biden signed the oil executive order banning the oil, but the House voted on it too. And there was some more. Maybe it was only two Democrats. It was Ilhan Omar and somebody else, another like squad member. But they apparently voted for the trade relations one. So, but yeah, this stuff all has tons of support in Congress.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of it seems to just they're the way that the narrative has been mobilized against Russians overall has been really disturbing. And I think you mentioned here that Koch Industries is one of the few companies that's kind of standing up to pressure and not like withdrawing all of its business activity from Russian. But I mean, the demands are blanket that anybody who is at all like associated with Russia has to denounce Putin. I think the number one, I don't pay attention to tennis. I thought Rafael Nadal was still the number one tennis player, but apparently it's a Russian guy now, and they're demanding that he like specifically denounce Putin to have to play at Wimbledon. I mean, this is crazy stuff, Dave. I really can't remember anything like it. To me, it kind of feels like after 9/11, but I was pretty young then, so if I'm maybe misremembering things, it could be the case. But man, this seems absolutely crazy. The anti-Russian hysteria going on now.
Yeah, no, it's really scary. Um, with Coke, they have a subsidiary in Russia that has two glass manufacturing plants. I think it employs about 600 people, and they decided to keep it open and keep it there, and they're getting just a ton of there's articles in the mainstream media about how horrible they are for doing it. But the COO, he said something interesting in their statement on it. They condemned the invasion in pretty strong words and said, if we leave, our plant and our employees, then, Russia's going to benefit from it because they can just, kind of take those assets. And Russia is kind of exploring the idea of seizing the assets of the that these Western companies that have left Russia left behind and nationalizing their businesses. So of course, that's going to help the Russian state and it's going to hurt the Russian people. So I thought that was just a really good point. And again, it's just more pressure that isn't really doing anything to stop the war. I mean, it's not going to do anything because Putin factored all this stuff in, and it's something like over 400 Western companies from the U.S. and Europe have either withdrawn completely from Russia or limited their operations. So yeah, who is that helping? I don't understand really. And they didn't have to. From most companies, some did because of sanctions, but a lot are just doing it on their own. It's like this,
I mean,
this
there's political
whole.
pressure.
Oh, sure, of course. But I mean, yeah, that's the thing is that seems to be enough for these companies to leave Russia. And I think that shows kind of the atmosphere now. It's kind of post 9/11 anti-Russia hysteria. I wasn't around. I mean, I was around after 9/11. I was 11 years old, but I do remember the years after. How the atmosphere of freedom fries. If you're not with us, you're with them, and don't negotiate with terrorists and all that crazy. The hysteria then. I remember it pretty well. And guys, like Eric Garris, who runs antiwar.com, he seems to think it's almost worse now. So it's definitely, and this is, we're just trying to cut off a whole country full of people from the world. And the hypocrisy is just kind of, it's just incredible because at the same time we're supporting Saudi Arabia, still waging a much worse, more horrific war in Yemen, and nobody really cares about that.
Right. No, that it is really infuriating, as an American, that the largest war protest in the past 20 years, well, probably 18 or so. I think Iraq war is 19 years old today or tomorrow or something like that. But anyways, with that, they're pro-war protests. They're demanding that the U.S. do more.
Yeah.
They're demanding that Putin end the war, but you're an American citizen. You have no leverage to demand that Putin end a war. You could demand that Biden end the war in Yemen or Iraq or Syria or Somalia or Libya, or lift sanctions of Afghanistan or Iran or Venezuela or North Korea and save lives that way, because Biden's going to starve more people to death this winter than Putin is likely going to kill in Ukraine, right? And nobody's going to pay any attention to that whatsoever. And it's like, how could you not demand the stop supporting Raytheon? The Secretary of Defense is from Raytheon, right?
Hmm.
You have no demands of Raytheon, but then you're going to condemn Coke for having 600 employees in Russia, people who just feed their families. Like, it's not going to hurt Putin to have lose that factory. It's going to devastate the thousands of people that are connected to it, but that's it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's you know because it's always been like the way that they get attention off of America's war crimes is by pointing to others, and this is kind of just that in like hyperdrive because there's a big war going on now that the U.S. I mean, the U.S. is totally involved in, but they're not the clear aggressor to ordinary people. Like I always think about how when I was in high school, I graduated high school in 2008. So I was in high school from 2004 to 2008 while the US government was doing all sorts of horrible, horrible things in Iraq and Afghanistan. And there was like a human rights club and there was all, these activist type people. And all they were talking about was Sudan and Darfur. And like, I always think back to that because that's kind of, it's just interesting. And you think how much of an interest the U.S. has an interest in, you know, highlighting these other wars and killings that are going on to distract from their own. And that's really what we're seeing today. And now anybody that brings up history or the context is labeled a Putin apologist, a traitor, or just, of course, they just assume that we support what Russia's doing in Ukraine, which nobody is saying. Nobody is supporting Putin's war. I'm sure, some people are, but I mean specifically the libertarian non-interventionists are not supporting his war. They're just trying to get people to understand that the U.S. has no power in this situation, and anything that it tries to do will make things worse.
Right. Well, and other than making like concessions, withdrawing the U.S. probably could offer like Russia withdrawing Patriot missile systems from Eastern Europe, moving troops out of the Baltics, restoring the INF Treaty, and I don't know if that would be enough to maybe end the war. But if you add that with maybe some concessions that Kiev could make, they could lessen their concessions in Ukraine to get the Russian troops out if the U.S. is also willing to take some steps to ensure like Russian security guarantees and sphere of influence and everything like that. But there's that's a discussion that's not going to happen. And if we try to have it, there will probably be somebody calling for the Department of Justice to investigate us. Because again, that's I mean, I lived not that far from Salem, Massachusetts, not that long ago, and they had the Salem Witch Museum, which is actually like a museum to McCarthyism and like warning about like how terrible it was and everything like that. But I feel like now if you went through there, like you would like see McCarthy as a hero, and
Yeah.
that's like kind of the mainstream consensus at this point. It's absolutely crazy. But Dave, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, you look back at 9/11, and I know on September 11th, 2001, Justin Raimondo wrote a column saying that it was blowback for U.S. support for Israel on 9/11. And like just remembering the atmosphere then, I think that was a pretty, brave thing that what he was doing, what Eric was doing, what they were doing was pretty brave, and they got a lot of death threats for it. So maybe things aren't as bad now because I haven't gotten any death threats, but it's just it feels like there's a lot of pressure to kind of fall in line and say I stand with Ukraine and that the U.S. should do more. But we're all going to look back. Everybody, more people are going to look back at this and then study all the mistakes that the U.S. made leading up to this. But now is the time to kind of speak out against it, even though it's kind of might feel scary too.
Yeah, I mean, especially with the calls people are making, and of course, what happened during COVID, like with the trucker protests in Canada and everything like that. I understand if people are a little bit, nervous about speaking out against the empire here. But Dave, thanks so much for returning to the show and for all the speaking out you do, the writing at antiwar.com. Everybody, great place to go first thing every morning. Dave, it's Dave most of the time, then Jason Ditz, and occasionally myself and Will Porter too, at news.antiwar.com. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Kyle.